Ngồi đâu phải tình gái, ngồi đâu ra.
All right, everyone seemed to very much enjoy the big game, so that was really fun. So today, we'll be talking about compassion. We are 4 letters into our camp theme, so we're reaching the very end, very close. So today we're talking about compassion, and then later in the day we'll be talking about the last letter, E. So I have an outline for us here, just like the usual. We're going to talk about what compassion is. I think it's always important to define what we're talking about. Next, I'll share another personal short story, very similar to yesterday's 30 Days of Positivity. And then I'll talk about what I think the 2 main components of compassion are. A few other things, another short story, and then we'll wrap it up so we can all go to lunch. So, first question, what is compassion? We are the Compassionate Service Society, so I hope that some of us have some idea of what compassion is. And so I would love to hear some of your answers of what you think compassion is. Oh, sorry, yes.
Like kindness and empathy for love for
Kindness and empathy. For other people, yes. It's a great answer. Anybody else have a response? Yes, you have. Being kind and respectful, yes. Great answer. Round of applause. So between those 2 answer choices, it's very clear that compassion can take on a lot of different forms. You can be empathetic, you can be respectful, you can be kind. All sorts of things can constitute what compassion means. Now I provided here a very, very technical definition of what compassion is per the internet. And it is an awareness of another person's pain or suffering, along with our effort to relieve it. So if you see someone who's very stressed out, then you do something to make them feel a little bit better. Now let's get into the short story. That was just setting up the framework for what compassion is. So I go to UVA, and at UVA we have a very local main street that runs, it's Emmett Street basically if you've been there. It goes through all the shopping centers and into the heart of the university where all of the students live. Now on Emmett Street, at the very beginning of the street, there's a median. And on that median, we have a lot of homeless individuals that come out there and ask for money. There's a very particular homeless man that all the students know. He's very fun. He doesn't really beg, he doesn't have a sign, but he stands there, smiles, dances, and claps for everyone who's waiting in traffic. So about 2 months ago, I was just curious what would happen and how I would feel if I spent some time out there with him. So that is what I did. And so here is a little video of what he looks like, the day-to-day. Having a great time. And so I went out to the grocery store, I bought some snacks, some Gatorades, some granola bars, put in a little package. Luckily, the week before, I received some money from family members, and I thought, why not just give that away? I don't really need it for anything at the moment. And so I also put in $100 just to see what would happen. And I went out there, and to really feel what it was like to be like him for just a little bit, I decided to stay out there in the heat, 91 degrees that day, for about 2 hours. And it was hot, extremely, extremely hot. And it was that moment that I realized what compassion really is about. Yes, it entails respect and kindness, but it really boils down to 2 very fundamental components. Number 1 is what Joanne mentioned earlier, empathy. Can anyone define what empathy is? Fantastic.
Empathy is understanding other people's situations and like being able to put yourself in their shoes so you can really like help them out and like I can understand you.
Exactly. So that's the first component. We have to be empathetic. The second component of compassion is giving. So you understand how they're feeling, you understand their pain and their suffering, but what are you going to do about it? And that's where this action comes in, the giving. So together, empathy plus giving equals compassion. Now, as Joanne just mentioned, empathy is about understanding someone else's point of view, understanding their pain and what they're going through. And now for all of us younger people here, sometimes we get mixed up with sympathy. I think those two words are very much sound the same. And so just to put it into more clear words, empathy is when I can feel your pain. And sympathy is when I'm just sorry that you are in pain. Next is giving. In the beginning, I asked what compassion is, and people said respect and kindness. And giving is very much the same. We can give in a lot of different ways. I think for all of us here, the most obvious example would be if we're in school and you help out your friend with their homework so they do really well. Maybe for our parents, they give us their time and their energy to be with us here at camp. And then as we get older, maybe you expand your circle a little bit, you find some charity organizations, and you decide to give money. So all these forms of giving are part of compassion. Now, compassion can be a lot of different dimensions. We talked about giving and empathy. But let's take a moment to look inwards and how compassion can enable forgiveness. Now, I'm going to ask, I think, a very fundamental question here. Please raise your hand if someone has ever hurt you. Okay, good. You can lower your hands. A lot of hurt. And I wrote here another kind of technical definition just for us to stay on top of what forgiveness is. But forgiveness is when we release those feelings of resentment and anger toward that person who has hurt you, who has harmed you in the past. And very importantly, forgiveness can occur whether or not they deserve it or whether or not they said sorry. Maybe we just forgive them anyways, regardless of all of these facts. Now here I have another example of how compassion can enable forgiveness. So we have Robin over here. This is Robin. And Mason over here. And I've seen that we have so many cookies during our days here. Cookie time is like every day. And let's say that during that cookie time, Robin accidentally eats Mason's cookie. So that it looks like that. A big bite. But Mason, and I guess all these things happen, but Robin feels kind of bad that he did this on accident. Mason employs these two components of compassion and puts himself in Robin's shoes. He understands that, hey, it was just an accident, accidents happen, and there's so many other cookies on the platter, there's no need to be very upset. And so with that empathy, he actually gives another cookie back to Robin, an additional cookie, and then Robin becomes happy again. And so that is how we can entail the giving, the empathy, and the forgiveness all in one package. Good job, Mason. I'm going to tell a very quick, another short story as a break from everything we just talked about. And this one is called kitten instincts. Oh. So let us imagine that there's a man walking along the side of the street. It's a very dark night, but in the midst of the bushes and the shadows, he can see a very small kitten lying in the bush. And so the man sees that, okay, this kitten is so cute, has no home, and so he decides to kneel down and put his hand inside the bush to see if the kitten would come out. Instead of receiving his help, the kitten fights back and claws at his hand. Another stranger walks by and asks the man, "Why are you helping the kitten if the kitten doesn't really want any help? It's obvious that the kitten will come out whenever it's ready." And the man responded that that is just the kitten's instincts. It's afraid and it's fearful of something that it doesn't know. My instinct as a human being is to reach out my hand to help. So the moral of the story is that with compassion, with giving, with forgiving, there's no real right time except for now. Now is always the right time to be compassionate. Now is always the right time to be forgiving and to love others and to give back. Now, a very important aspect that I want to talk about before we really recap everything so far is that being compassionate is in your control. It's whatever you want to do for somebody else, your friends, your family, and other adults. But sometimes, just like that kitten, your compassion won't be very well received. And we shouldn't be discouraged by that. We continue to exude compassion and love and empathy. And slowly, maybe things will change. And so the message is that other people's reactions to your compassion cannot be in your control. I'm already on the last point, such a quick talk today. I've always included this point in most of the little discussions we've had so far about how to build this habit. Building a habit of gratitude, of respect, of action. And so the question is, how do we build a habit of compassion and being compassionate? Now, I had a very interesting conversation yesterday with Golan, actually, and we talked about how for all of these things, maybe there is no shortcut. Maybe we just have to do it. And maybe it looks something like this. That the more and more you look for shortcuts, you're actually putting yourself behind. But I reflected on that a little bit last night, and I thought, it's not very helpful just to tell you that we should just do it. And so how about I try to come up with some type of shortcut to help us all out. And this is what I came up with. This is in Vietnamese. I understand that. I do understand what it means as well. But I'm going to ask anybody here if they think they know what it means. And we've talked about this before, actually, in our youth group. So, Amelia?
If you heard a stick and any, I guess, problem would be small. It's probably not a good position.
Tâm lớn chuyện gì cũng nhỏ. And yeah, you're exactly right. That is basically the translation. A big heart makes all of our problems smaller. And to me, that is the shortcut. There will never be a one charity thing that you can do to be compassionate for the rest of your life. But this idea, this mentality of having a big heart, so that you can always find ways to be compassionate, is the shortcut to building this habit. Does anyone have any questions? This statement, actually, to me, is very profound. because it means that we can make everything around us a lot smaller. We don't think about ourselves as much. We don't ruminate on our problems because our heart is so big. We see that there's so much to be done in the world, and that everything that we're dealing with is really just a small dot. And that is what compassion is all about. So, already we're at the summary. Compassion is an awareness for other people's pain and suffering, along with our effort to relieve it. We have a very simple math equation here. I'm terrible at math, but here it is. It's giving, empathy first, plus giving equals compassion. Being compassionate allows us to forgive, and forgiveness makes us happier. Compassion cannot determine how others react. We can just do our part and be compassionate all the time. And lastly, the shortcut is that with a big heart, we can always find avenues to give, to be compassionate, and then all of our problems just fade away. Thank you.
Thank you, Austin, for yet another inspiring talk. It's so sad, we only have one left, unfortunately, this afternoon.
Yeah.
We have lunch at 12:30, I believe, so we have another half hour before we can eat. I mean, you can eat snacks and all, but that was a great time. This compliment box, there's still compliments to be written. There's pens and index cards back there. If you guys want to start doing that. Lunch is in 30 minutes. Thank you guys. Thank you, Austin.
Thì đã thật á.
No, không giờ giận mày đâu mà không biết. Chị nói cho nó bao giờ giận em đâu.